I met a gypsy.
So when you were talking about, I guess, like that Cold War between motocross and supercross, like, is that a kind of thing where you like actually even know where the origins of that stem from, or is that just like this kind of slow burn that just like ends up there and everyone is scratching their head being like, why do we hate them?
Well,
Like, I don't even know them.
let me give you a quick history lesson. So the same year that pro motocross as a championship starts in 1972, a promoter here in Southern California named Mike Goodwin came up with the idea of putting a motocross race downtown in the LA Coliseum, and he called it the Super Bowl of motocross. It was not a part of a series. It was sort of an invitational. An American teenager, 16-year-old Marty Tripes, American teenager wins, beats all the Europeans, and it's a really big deal. The Europeans kind of poo-poo it like, it's just a fun race.
This racing is shit.
Yeah, but Goodwin had an idea. He may have borrowed that idea off some big events that took place in the 50s in Czech Republic and over in Europe. But he was the one who came up with the idea of what is now Supercross as we know it. Goodwin had a very controversial attitude, outlook, demeanor, and early on said that Supercross would replace motocross in America. Ultimately, we'd all be racing his new version of this. And he, in fact, killed the Trans Am Series and the Inter Am Series. And to a large extent, the Florida Winter Am Series. These were big tours back in the day that were meaningful because everyone loved the idea of racing Supercross in stadiums. And then other promoters sort of joined in, and they didn't have the same attachment to motocross racing because they didn't own tracks. They were professional promoters, and they were, some of them, had motorcycles or were somehow affiliated. But others, like Mickey Thompson or Alan Becker, and who had Pace Management, they just saw a way to sell some tickets and get people in. So there was always this sort of difference between the outlook of pro motocross and the outlook of supercross. There were people who came to truly love and care about the sport, like Gary Becker and Bill West, as far as promoters goes. And then, but there was always this idea that Supercross was proliferating to the point where I want to say in 1985, there was like 18 Supercrosses, and there were 3 more scheduled that just didn't happen for one reason or another. And it really began to shrink pro motocross as we know it. So fast forward to the 90s, we have all this growth because of, international people coming like Jean-Michel Bayle and putting a spotlight on it. The Europeans starting to come off their dislike of it. And then Jeremy McGrath, he changes everything. And Supercross, though, hits a rock bottom with the Las Vegas Supercross of 1995. That's the night the lights went out in Las Vegas. There were so many things happening underneath the surface where it was animosity. The riders weren't getting paid. There was all these different promoters. Everything was complicated, and finally Alan Becker's son Gary and a guy named Charlie Mancuso bought the whole thing. Bought the other promoters out, brought it together. By now Goodwin's gone. By now Mickey Thompson's gone. That's a whole different podcast. That's a whole different book. Anyway. So Gary Becker starts to really bring Supercross back, taking the opportunity midway through the Jeremy McGrath years to say, whoa, we've got to reset. We're going the wrong way. And really grew Supercross to the point where another entity came along and bought it in 2001, and then another entity. And
so it became like a profitable thing.
Profitable, but they kept wanting more and more dates. And pro motocross was getting kind of really shrunk down. So when Becker in 95 started buying out the other promoters, that's when my dad said, hey, fellow outdoor promoters, if we don't get our shit together, if we don't become a more professional group of promoters, if we don't make this series better, if we don't find a way to get a title sponsor, if we don't find a way to get a better TV package,
And all of those things, you need one
yes,
company to do a deal
Yeah.
with one other company.
and the AMA was trying to do that, but they weren't very good at that. But the Supercross was almost, completely running their own show. They had a sanction, but that was it. So Dad got Pro Motocross to really get back together and start working together and make the events more uniform. And that strength and the fact that nobody buys a Supercross bike because there's no place to ride a Supercross bike. The stadium, has a dirt in it one week. It has grass in it the next week. It might have race cars in it the next week. It might have baseball players the next week. But a motocross track, that's where you ride the bike that you bought because you love dirt bikes. And my dad was able to work with Supercross to get that message to them that, hey, we're following you, but we're not going to let you swallow us up because we are important to the industry. Us promoters, the Gene Ritchies, the Ward Robinsons of Unadilla, the all the different people who are year-round promoters that have their tracks, they relied on that one big race. Well, go to 2008. Kenneth Feld buys Supercross, and Mr. Feld had a lot of successful businesses. His father came from the circus business, the record business.
Yeah.
He figured out things like what Disney on Ice. Monster Jam, all this different stuff. The one thing that they had that wasn't sort of a show was Supercross. So I don't think that he initially had a warm and fuzzy about it and wanted to take it overseas. He wanted to expand it. He wanted to, and it got to be a real Cold War at that point, especially after the recession.
So was there any contact between you guys?
Oh yeah, yeah.
There was...
There was. We always knew what each other was doing because we rely on the same industry.
Yeah.
We have the same athletes. We have the same
manufacturers,
teams, the same manufacturers.
Yeah.
We weren't working together enough, and there was always this fear that we were going to get swallowed up, meaning outdoor motocross, and we worried about what that would mean. But at some point over in the teens, when I say the teens, I mean like from 2012 forward, Mr. Feld started to really embrace Supercross, and he started to really understand the business and how it worked and what the importance of the domestic distributors were. People always talk about we need to take Supercross overseas. Yeah, that would be great, but Supercross in America is predicated and supported by domestic sales.
American brands.
American Honda is what pays Jet and Hunter and Joe and Chance Hymas. The Yamaha team is based on Yamaha sales in America.
Yeah.
And so finally, when they started to realize that an important aspect of this whole food chain was outdoor motocross racing, even though not nearly as shiny and glitzy as what Supercross was, he got the message and said, you know what, maybe if we work together, maybe if we put our assets together, maybe we put our heads together. And a person who was very instrumental in that was Dave Gowand of Monster Energy.
Yeah.
Because suddenly we both had the same sponsor for the first time. Because remember, we were always Rockstar or Red Bull. And then all of a sudden we're Monster. And it kind of opened a phone line, a dialogue between us, and we started working together more and more. And that leads us to Daytona in 2020. And they come in person and say, look, maybe we found things we could work on together. And as vague as that sounds, I'll give you a perfect example. The television package.
Yeah.
So for years, Supercross would go to market and try to get a TV package. But their series ran from January to the 1st of May. So it's about a 5-month series. But then
it just creates a void in their programming.
And so then we would come along and we'd have a 4-month season of shows. And it was totally different, and we could never really monetize it in a way that could benefit the industry and the sport other than to just get it on TV. And the idea was, well, what if we put our seasons together And instead of 2 different small seasons, it was one long season, and sold that to a network. And that required very difficult and a very dark time for us. We had to do a 1-year TV package in 2022.
Yeah.
And it was a nightmare.
It was rough.
It was rough.
Yeah.
It was rough because, it was so rough that Lucas Oil is no longer part of the sport, pro motocross. But man, they did a lot for us from
For a long time.
For a long time.
Yeah,
But it was just a real misadventure for everyone. I still get the occasional, message like the streaming never worked, and I'm like, believe me.
Listen,
I know.
I have a podcast with 2 cameras and a fucking TV, and it's hard. All right, I cannot imagine what it takes to take all that shit and put it in a field in the middle of nowhere and make that happen. That's not an easy task to do.
If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. And to listen to the full 3-hour podcast, search Gypsy Tales in your favorite podcast platform or click the link in the description below. Gypsy Gang.